Hello, my dear friends, wherever you are watching from today. I hope you are warm, safe, and perhaps holding something simple that brings comfort. A cup of coffee, a quiet moment, or a prayer whispered without words. Let me ask you something. Have you ever passed by a veteran on a snowy street, eyes lowered, coat worn thin by too many winters, and wondered what battles still echo inside his silence? Or have you ever felt unseen yourself, as if life moved on while you were left standing in the cold? Tonight's story carries us to Cedar Hollow, a small mountain town where snow falls gently, but judgment falls hard. It is a tale of a homeless veteran who chose to disappear and a wounded German shepherd feared for his teeth instead of his loyalty. Two souls marked by pain walking beneath the same gray sky, searching not for redemption but for rest. And as the snow deepens and a storm approaches, we are reminded of something sacred. Sometimes the miracle does not come to erase suffering, but to place a faithful companion beside us within it. If you are ready, walk into this quiet winter night with me and discover how grace can still find us, even when the world looks away. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe because some stories don't just entertain. They change the way we see loyalty loss and the quiet miracles hiding in plain sight. Snow drifted in thin, lazy spirals over Cedar Hollow, Montana. Late afternoon light bruised the sky a dull gray, and the wind had the polite cruelty of winter, sharp enough to bend a man's shoulders, not yet fierce enough to knock him down. Ethan Mercer stepped off the bus, as if the town had exhaled him, onto its cracked platform and immediately regretted it. The door folded shut behind him with a sigh, like an old machine tired of being useful. For a moment he stood there in the small, frozen stillness, a solitary figure holding a battered canvas duffel that looked older than some marriages. He was 48, but winter and war had negotiated with his face for years and left their signatures everywhere, a lean jaw with hard angles, a mouth that seemed permanently set between apology and refusal, and eyes the color of river stones, calm, watchful, and tired of surprises. His hair was dark, with a streak of silver that cut through it like a scar kept longer than most men. His age wore it not for style, but because he'd stopped caring what mirrors demanded. A rough, short beard shadowed his cheeks just enough to make him look like he belonged to the road. His left knee, damaged long ago by a piece of shrapnel and worsened by the stubborn pride of walking anyway, throbbed under the cold like a buried ember, remembering how to burn. He pulled his brown leather jacket tighter. The zipper was half broken, the collar shiny with wear, and beneath it, a faded plaid flannel shirt showed red and navy squares like an old flag that had survived too many storms. On his boots clung a crust of salt and ice from highways that never loved him back. To the casual eye, he was the kind of man people labeled quickly drifter trouble, shame, or warning. Ethan had learned long ago that labels were cheaper than bread and far easier to hand out. Cedar Hollow looked like a place built by people who wanted to hide from the world and then got angry when the world found them anyway. Timber buildings hunched against the wind. A diner sign swung on its chain with a squeak that sounded like complaint. A few cars idled near the curb, their exhaust rising in pale ghosts. On the hills behind town, pines stood in dark ranks, stoic and judgmental like ancient witnesses who had seen men come and go and never once cared who won. Ethan did not come for nostalgia. He came because certain ghosts didn't stay buried unless you chose to dig them up and look them in the face. And because his life lately had begun to feel like a hallway with too many locked doors. He had spent years walking away from rooms of command rooms, of money rooms, of applause rooms, where a younger version of himself believed he could fix the world by barking orders at it. Then, one by one, those rooms shut their lights off. What remained was the road and the ache and a silence that grew teeth at night. His stomach reminded him he was human, It was a hollow, unpoetic growl. He adjusted the duffel strap and limped toward the local general store, a squat building with a fogged front window and a bell over the door that chimed like reluctant hospitality. Warmth hit him in the face, thin warmth smelling of sawdust, stale tobacco, and coffee that had given up hope. Behind the counter stood a man whose personality had the texture of dried lemon peel. His name, according to the stitched tag on his flannel vest, was Martin Coyle. He was in his late 50s, short and stocky, with a neck like a stump and a complexion that stayed ruddy year-round, as if his blood was always irritated. His hair was gray and cut close, and his eyes were small, sharp, and permanently suspicious eyes of someone who had been cheated once and then decided to punish the rest of humanity for it. The kind of man who called it being practical when he was really just being mean. Martin looked up and let his gaze slide over Ethan, like a hand searching for weapons. "Afternoon," he said, but the word came out like a warning sign. Ethan nodded. He moved down the narrow aisle, choosing carefully a small loaf of bread, a tin of sardines, the kind of food that didn't ask questions and didn't promise comfort. He placed them on the counter and dug into his pocket. Coins. A few crumpled bills that had softened into surrender. He counted slowly, calloused fingers stiff with cold. 30 seconds felt like an hour in that kind of quiet. Martin tapped the counter once, not impatient, accusatory, $3.50. Ethan counted again. His coins came up short by 40 cents, which is a ridiculous amount of money to be defeated by until you've been defeated by it. He looked up and met Martin's eyes. "I'm short," Ethan said. His voice was low, hoarse, unused to being kind. "I can work it off." "Sweep your walk. Shovel snow." Martin's mouth tightened as if he'd tasted something bitter. He snatched the bread, slid it back behind the counter, and planted his hand on the sardines like he was protecting them from theft. "We don't do handouts," he said. "If you can't pay, you don't eat. That's how it works." There was a moment brief as a spark, when something old rose in Ethan's chest, a memory of authority, of rooms where men stood straighter when he entered, where his name was enough to move resources and reshape plans. He could have reached into accounts no one in Cedar Hollow could imagine and bought this whole store, the street it gay on, and the mountain behind it. He could have said something that would make Martin's face go pale and polite, but Ethan swallowed it. He was not here as a title. He was here as a man trying for once to be smaller than his past. The trouble with power was that it made you loud even when you whispered. Ethan was tired of his own noise. He gathered his coins, nodded once, and turned away without argument. Pride felt heavy in his pocket, and it didn't buy food either. The bell over the door chimed again as he stepped outside into colder air that slapped him awake. The street had the quiet of a town that watched strangers like predators watch injured prey. Ethan moved into a narrow alley between the store and an old hardware shop. The wind cut through the gap like a blade. He leaned against brick, slid down slowly, and let his knee rest. Pain flared sharp, familiar, personal. He closed his eyes and exhaled. His breath fogged the air and vanished. That he thought was a pretty good summary of his life lately. Appear, exhale, disappear. A soft scraping sound came from the far end of the alley, behind a stack of wooden pallets. Ethan's eyes opened alert, in the way men become alert when they've survived things that didn't want them to. He stayed still, listening. Another scratch. Then a low sound, almost a growl, almost a plea. "There's nothing here for you, friend," Ethan said, not loudly. "I'm as empty-handed as you are." Something detached itself from the shadows. At first, Ethan thought it was a wolf. The animal was big, German shepherd-shaped, but larger than most, built with the kind of frame that promised strength even now. Its coat was an unusual mix, black and charcoal, with streaks of pale silver along the shoulders and face, as if moonlight had spilled onto fur and never left. But the body under that coat was skeletal. Ribs showed like the rungs of a ladder, Its right hind leg favored the ground, stepping carefully, unevenly, like an old soldier with an old injury. The dog stopped about 10 feet away, its head lowered, teeth bared. Not loud, no barking heroics, no cinematic drama, just a quiet, deadly warning. Its eyes were amber, bright with fear and defiance braided together. The dog looked like it expected pain as a rule, kindness as a trick. Ethan did not flinch. He had seen that look before on human faces, too young for it in places where the air smelled like metal and regret. He held his hands where the dog could see them. "Easy," he murmured. "Easy now." The dog's neck made Ethan's stomach twist. A thick cable collar steel braided rust dark, too tight, bit into the flesh. The skin around it was raw, inflamed, and wet where the metal had dug in. It wasn't just a collar, it was a slow punishment. Someone had put that on when the dog was smaller and never bothered to take it off, or never cared if it hurt. Heat rose in Ethan's blood, burning through the cold. Anger clean and bright. He forgot his hunger, forgot the sting in his knee. All he could see was the cruelty pressed into the dog's throat. "I see it," Ethan said, voice low. "I see what's hurting you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folding knife. The blade clicked open. The sound made the dog stiffen. A low rumble vibrated in its chest muscles, coiling to run or fight. Ethan froze his own body into calm. He didn't advance. He didn't wave the blade. He simply held it low and looked at the dog as if it were a person, an equal, not a project. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, "but that iron will. If you keep it, it will kill you." The wind howled at the mouth of the alley. Snow drifted in. Time stretched. Ethan could feel the town around them, unseen eyes, invisible judgment. He kept his gaze soft, his breathing slow. A man like Ethan had learned patience the hard way. In war, impatience got people killed. In life, it got you lonely. The dog took a step forward, then another. It stretched its neck out to sniff Ethan's hand. Ethan didn't move a muscle. Hot breath puffed against his knuckles. The dog's scent carried cold dirt, fear, and something else, stubborn life. Ethan reached out with his free hand and touched the dog's shoulder. The animal shuddered but didn't retreat. Ethan's fingers slid carefully up to the collar. The dog whimpered, pure misery leaking out as sound. "I know," Ethan whispered. "Hold still." This was delicate. The cable had buried itself close to blood vessels. One wrong slip, and Ethan would trade cruelty for tragedy. He angled the blade, wedged it between metal and raw skin with the steadiness of a man who had stitched wounds in worse light than this. He saw gently at the weakest point of rusted clasp. The metal resisted, stubborn and old. Ethan gritted his teeth. The dog trembled violently, but it stayed. Stayed because something in Ethan's posture said the word no one had ever truly proven to it safe. With a sharp snap, the clasp gave. The collar loosened. Ethan pulled the cable free and let it fall to the concrete. It clattered away like a discarded relic of someone's ugliness. The dog staggered back, shaking its head, hard ears flapping, pawing at its neck in confused panic. Then it stopped. It looked at Ethan. The amber fire in its eyes changed hostility, dissolving into bewildered gratitude. Vulnerability, the kind that feels like standing unclothed in winter. Ethan felt something crack in the ice around his own heart. He swallowed suddenly, embarrassed by the tightness in his throat. "Well," he said softly with the smallest hint of humor that makes two of us, "I've been trying to take a collar off my life for years." The dog stepped forward again, slower now. It pressed its heavy head against Ethan's left knee, right where the old injury lived. Warmth seeped through denim. Pain eased just a little, like mercy. Ethan's hand hovered, then rested on the dog's silver-streaked head. The fur was coarse and cold, but under it pulsed a living heat. He stared down at this half-wild shepherd, with the look of a creature who had been betrayed into ferocity. "You need a name," Ethan murmured. "Something that doesn't taste like fear." The dog's ears twitched. It blinked slowly, as if the world had finally asked a question it wanted to answer. Nova, Ethan decided, surprising himself, because even in the dark, something can still flare up and refuse to go out. Nova let out a long breath, a sigh that sounded like surrender and relief braided together. And in the thin, dirty light of that alley, in a town that had already judged them both, a pact formed without signatures or speeches, just a hand on fur and a head on a damaged knee and two strays, deciding they would not be alone tonight. Ethan pushed himself to his feet with a quiet wince. "Come on," he said, glancing toward the street where the cold waited like a creditor. "We'll find somewhere that doesn't ask for 40 cents. Nova limped to his side, close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. The town's wind hissed through the alley, but Ethan felt for the first time in a long while that the silence inside him had softened. Not gone, just less sharp. And as the late afternoon snow kept falling soft as ash, from a gentler world, Ethan and Nova stepped out together. Two shadows stitched into one, heading toward whatever came next. Night fell quickly, as it always did in the mountains, as if the sky grew tired of pretending to be gentle. Snow thickened into steady sheets, swallowing sound and color alike. Streetlights thinned and then disappeared entirely as Ethan Mercer turned away from Cedar Hollow, his boots crunching into a narrower road that climbed toward the pine forest. The temperature dropped with every step. Breath became smoke. The world reduced itself to darkness, white flakes, and the quiet discipline of moving forward. Ethan did not consider the motel near the highway nor the church, whose windows glowed faintly with charity and questions. He had learned that places built to shelter strangers often demanded pieces of the soul. In return, gratitude, confession, promises to become something else by morning. Tonight he had no interest in explaining himself to anyone. He tightened his grip on the frayed strap of his duffel bag and glanced down at Nova. The German shepherd limped beside him, close enough that their shadows overlapped. Nova's coat, black and charcoal streaked with pale silver, caught the weak moonlight filtering through the clouds, giving him a ghostly outline against the snow. His gait was uneven, the right hind leg favoring the ground, but he kept pace with stubborn focus. His ears flicked constantly, cataloging the forest's whispers. Despite the raw wound around his neck, now freed from its iron prison, he stayed near Ethan's left knee, as if guarding the old injury with instinctive loyalty. "You're not much for detours, are you?" Ethan murmured. His voice sounded rougher at night, scraped thin by cold and memory. Nova huffed softly, a sound that might have been agreement or might have been exhaustion. The road narrowed until it was barely a suggestion, two faint ruts swallowed by fresh snow. Pines closed in tall and densely packed their branches, heavy with white. Ethan slowed, leaning more weight onto his good leg. The pain in his left knee pulsed deep and insistent, a reminder of decisions made decades earlier under different skies. He had learned to walk through pain without announcing it. Pain was honest that way. It didn't need an audience. At last, the trees opened just enough to reveal a shape crouched among them, a small cabin half hidden by snow-laden boughs. It was built low and solid rough timber, darkened by age, and weatherstone chimney leaning slightly as if tired of standing straight. No lights, no smoke. The porch sagged in the middle, and the steps groaned under Ethan's careful weight. Nova paused at the edge of the clearing, hackles lifting for just a moment. He sniffed the air, alert but not afraid. Ethan followed his gaze to the cabin door. "Easy," he said quietly. "This place won't bite." The cabin had once belonged to Elias Boone, a reclusive forester who'd preferred trees to people and silence to excuses. Elias had been tall and narrow as a fence post, with a beard that made him look older than he was, and hands permanently stained with sap and soil. He'd laughed rarely, but when he did, it came from somewhere deep and genuine. Years ago, when Ethan had still believed in straight lines and clean endings, Elias had taught him how to split wood properly, how to read wind in the pines, how to listen without preparing a reply. Elias had died alone one winter, heart giving out quietly by this very hearth. The county had locked the cabin and forgotten it. Ethan had not. He reached up beneath the doorframe, fingers numb until they found the loose knot in the wood. Behind it rested a small iron key, cold as a confession. The lock protested when he turned it, metal grinding against metal, then surrendered with a dull click. Inside, the cabin breathed out cold air that smelled of dust, old paper, and unburned pine. The darkness pressed close. Ethan struck a match. The flare revealed a single room frozen in time, a narrow bed against the far wall, a small wooden table, 2 chairs, a cracked enamel kettle, and a stone fireplace filled with logs that had waited patiently for years. Nova hesitated at the threshold. His body trembled, whether from cold fatigue or the unfamiliar safety of walls. Ethan could not tell. "Come on," Ethan said softly. "You're allowed inside." Nova stepped in and almost immediately sank onto the rug before the fireplace. His sides heaved. His breathing was shallow, uneven, a worrying rhythm that tightened something in Ethan's chest. "All right," Ethan muttered, shrugging off his jacket. "Let's get you warm." He moved with quiet efficiency, the kind born from repetition under pressure. He set the kettle on the hearth, arranged dry logs, fed strips of old newspaper between them, and struck another match. Fire took reluctantly at first, then, with growing confidence, crackling like bones waking up. Orange light crept across the walls, chasing shadows into corners. Ethan knelt beside Nova. Now that the adrenaline of rescue had faded, the damage was clearer. The skin around Nova's neck was swollen and bruised raw where the cable had bitten deep. There was no fever yet, no burning heat under the fur, but Nova's ears were cold, his paws colder still. Hypothermia mild but dangerous, exhaustion layered over trauma. Not sick. Ethan murmured more to himself than the dog, just drained. Nova growled faintly when Ethan touched the wound, more reflex than threat. His amber eyes flicked up, watching Ethan closely, measuring intent. Ethan met that gaze steadily. "I know," he said. "I won't rush you." He poured hot water into a chipped basin, letting it cool until steam faded. With a clean cloth torn from an old towel, he gently washed the wound, careful not to scrape the tender edges. Nova's muscles tensed, then slowly eased. The dog did not bite. He did not bolt. He endured. "That's it," Ethan said quietly. "You're tougher than you look." When the cleaning was done, Ethan rummaged through the cabin's small cedar chest. Beneath moth-eaten blankets and yellowed papers, his fingers found something thick and familiar, a heavy wool sweater, forest green, stretched wide at the shoulders. Elias's sweater. It smelled faintly of smoke and earth, of hands that had known honest work. Ethan hesitated, then pressed the wool briefly to his face. "Hope you don't mind, old man," he said to the empty room. He worked the sweater carefully over Nova's head and front legs. It hung awkwardly too large, swallowing the dog's frame, but warmth mattered more than dignity tonight. Nova shivered hard once, then let out a long, rattling breath and rested his chin on his paws. "There," Ethan said, the corner of his mouth lifting. "You look ridiculous." Nova's tail thumped once against the rug, weak but unmistakable. Ethan sat back against the armchair near the hearth, stretching his injured leg gingerly. Pain flared, then settled into its usual dull, companionable ache. He stared into the fire, watching it rearrange itself. Fire was honest. It took what you gave it and gave back exactly what it could. No promises, no lies. "You know," Ethan said after a while, voice low and conversational, "they used to call me the man with the orders." He snorted softly. "Funny thing is, orders don't mean much when the only thing listening is a pile of logs and a half-frozen dog." Nova's ears twitched, his eyes half closed. "I was good at it," Ethan went on, not boasting, just stating fact. "Too good, maybe. When you spend long enough telling people where to stand and when to move, you forget how to ask if they're tired. He poked the fire with a stick. Turns out the world doesn't like being commanded forever. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Outside, snow whispered against the window like fingers tapping gently, endlessly. Ethan pulled a dense block of survival bread from his duffel, hard enough to crack a tooth. He broke off a small piece and held it near Nova's nose. Nova sniffed, hesitated, then accepted it carefully, teeth barely grazing Ethan's skin. He chewed slowly, methodically, as if afraid the food might vanish if rushed. "Good," Ethan murmured. He ate the rest himself, washing it down with melted snow from the kettle. It tasted like nothing and like relief. Time lost its edges in the cabin. Firelight replaced clocks. Nova's breathing evened out, deepening into the rhythm of rest rather than survival. Ethan found himself watching the dog the way he had once watched over sleeping men before dawn, counting breaths, without meaning to, comforted by their steadiness. At some point, Nova shifted closer, pressing his wool-wrapped flank against Ethan's shin. Heat soaked through fabric and bone, easing the ache in Ethan's knee more effectively than any pill ever had. Ethan stilled, then let his hand rest on Nova's shoulder. The dog sighed, a sound of complete trust that felt undeserved and therefore precious. "Guess this is home for tonight," Ethan said quietly. Outside, the snow thickened, burying tracks, erasing the day's judgments. The cabin stood firm among the pines, a small island of warmth in a cold sea. Two damaged beings, one man, one dog, shared silence without needing to fill it. When Ethan finally lay down on the narrow bed, boots off, jacket folded nearby, Nova remained on the rug by the fire. His eyes stayed open until Ethan's breathing slowed, until the room settled into sleep. Only then did Nova close his own eyes, guarding not the door, but the fragile peace they had built out of patience and firelight. And beyond the window, snow continued to fall, indifferent and endless, sealing the night around them like a promise that tomorrow would have to work harder to break what had quietly begun here. Morning arrived quietly, the way it often did after a night of heavy snow, as if the world were afraid of waking what it had buried. Pale light filtered through a ceiling of low gray clouds, turning Cedar Hollow into a study of muted whites and softened edges. The road into town was slick with packed ice tires, hissing as cars passed carefully, reminding everyone that winter still held the advantage. Ethan Mercer walked back toward Cedar Hollow, with Nova at his side, the forest releasing them reluctantly. The German shepherd moved better than the night before, though his gait remained guarded, the right hind leg still stiff. The oversized green wool sweater hung awkwardly on his broad frame, the sleeves tied at his chest with a strip of twine Ethan had found in the cabin. Against the clean snow, Nova looked almost unreal, black and charcoal fur streaked with silver eyes, bright now with cautious alertness rather than fear. Ethan's face was drawn but calmer. The fire, the silence, and the simple act of keeping another being alive had steadied something inside him. His beard was rimmed with frost, his breath slow and controlled. The pain in his knee was present as it always was, but it no longer dictated his mood. He had learned long ago that pain became unbearable only when it was allowed to decide who you were. They reached the center of town as Cedar Hollow stretched itself awake. The diner's sign creaked lazily. A few shop doors were still dark. Across the street stood Maple and Steam Cafe, its windows fogged from warmth, inside amber light glowing like a promise that hadn't yet learned how fragile it was. The cafe belonged to Darlene Whitaker. She was 52, tall and broad-shouldered, with the posture of someone who had spent years carrying heavy things without asking for help. Her hair, once a deep chestnut, was now streaked heavily with gray and pulled into a practical knot at the nape of her neck. Her skin was weathered but warm-toned, freckled from summers, spent working instead of resting. There was kindness in her eyes, hazel, sharp, observant, but it had been tempered by exhaustion and debt. Darlene smiled easily at customers and rarely complained, but Cedar Hollow knew she was drowning quietly under bank loans and late notices she kept folded in her apron pocket. Ethan pushed the cafe door open, the bell chiming softly. Heat wrapped around him, carrying the smell of coffee, bread, and sugar. Darlene looked up from behind the counter, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted towel. Her eyes paused on Ethan's worn jacket, then flicked briefly to Nova outside the window, sitting obediently on the porch despite the cold. "Mornin'," she said, cautious but not unkind. "Morning," Ethan replied. He removed his gloves, revealing hands scarred and strong fingers slightly crooked from old breaks. "I was hoping we could make a deal." Darlene tilted her head. "I don't run credit." "I don't ask for it," Ethan said. "I work. You feed me. I can fix your steps. They're rotting on the left side. Split wood, clear snow." Darlene studied him the way women who have survived study men, carefully reading posture and tone more than words. She noticed the way he stood without swagger, how his eyes didn't wander, how he didn't flinch when her gaze lingered. She noticed the limp, subtle but honest. After a moment, she nodded once. "You fix the steps and clear the front. I'll get you breakfast. And scraps for the dog." Ethan exhaled a quiet release. "That'll do." He stepped back outside. Nova rose immediately, tail low but wagging once. Ethan fetched a shovel from the side of the building, its wooden handle worn smooth by years of hands. The moment his fingers closed around it, Nova froze. The dog's ears flattened, his body tensed, muscles coiling like wire pulled too tight. Then he bolted, scrambling clumsily across the icy ground and diving beneath a parked pickup truck. His claws scraped frantically against asphalt, his breath coming fast and shallow. Ethan stopped mid-step. The shovel slipped from his hand and fell gently into the snow. He stood very still, the morning suddenly too loud with memory. He understood instantly, not intellectually, instinctively. The way men understood ambushes, the way animals understood traps. He knelt slowly, then sat down fully in the snow, ignoring the cold seeping through his jeans. He kept his hands open, palms visible, resting loosely on his knees. He did not speak at first. From inside the cafe, Darlene watched through the fogged glass. She saw the big man sit down in the snow like a child who had dropped something fragile. She saw the shovel abandoned a few feet away, harmless and forgotten. Something tightened behind her eyes. After a long minute, Ethan spoke softly. "I won't use it," he said, not raising his voice. "I don't need it right now." Nova remained under the truck, eyes glowing amber, in shadow, chest heaving. Ethan didn't move closer. He didn't call. He waited. The snow continued to fall lightly, dusting his shoulders, softening his outline until he looked like part of the landscape. Time passed in silence. 5 minutes. 10. The town moved around them. Cars rolled by, boots crunched. No one interfered. Finally, a gray-black nose emerged from beneath the truck. Nova sniffed the air, watching Ethan's stillness. Slowly, carefully, he crawled forward, belly low, ready to flee at the slightest threat. He approached Ethan's outstretched hand and pressed his cold nose against Ethan's fingers. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hand rose just enough to rest against Nova's cheek. "That's it," he murmured. "Good." Nova leaned in, then sat beside him, shoulder pressed against Ethan's thigh. The dog trembled once, then steadied. From the cafe doorway, Darlene turned away, wiping her face roughly with her towel. She didn't comment when Ethan stood again and picked up the shovel with slow, exaggerated care. Nova stayed close this time, alert but no longer panicked. Ethan worked efficiently. He shoveled snow in clean lines, repaired the step with spare lumber and nails from the shed. His movements precise and practiced. He worked like a man who had built more than structures, who had built routines meant to keep people alive. The moment fractured when a dark SUV rolled up to the curb. It stopped too close to the cafe engine, idling with unnecessary authority. Two figures stepped out. The first was Hank Voss, early 40s, lean to the point of sharpness, wearing an expensive winter coat that looked more suited to a city sidewalk than a mountain town. His hair was blonde and neatly cut, his face narrow with a perpetual smile that never reached his eyes. Hank's eyes were the kind that assessed value constantly, land people leverage. He had grown up poor and hated it, and that hatred had hardened into ambition without mercy. Beside him stood Officer Lucas Reed, mid-30s, average build, jaw perpetually tense. His uniform was clean, his posture correct, but his eyes darted too often, betraying discomfort. Reed wasn't cruel by nature. He was careful, too careful. Years of being told to just follow procedure had sanded down his instincts. Hank clapped his gloved hands together. "Morning, Darlene," he called, stepping onto the cafe porch without invitation. "We need a word." Darlene came out, shoulders squared. "I told you yesterday, I'm not selling." Hank's smile tightened. "It's not about selling, it's about inevitability. Bank's tired of waiting, winter resort projects moving ahead." He glanced at Ethan and Nova, amusement flickering across his face. "You've hired help now." Officer Reed cleared his throat. "We're just here to make sure everyone understands their options." Ethan set the shovel down and stepped forward slowly. He didn't place himself between them aggressively. He simply stood where he was, present, unavoidable. Nova moved with him, standing close, fur along his back, lifting slightly, eyes fixed on Hank with a quiet, electric intensity. Hank laughed under his breath. "Relax. I'm not afraid of a mutt and a handyman." Ethan reached down and picked up a rotting wooden rail from the porch. He held it loosely, testing its weight, then snapped it cleanly in half with one sharp motion. The sound was loud, final. Wood fibers screamed. The laughter died instantly. Ethan dropped the broken pieces at his feet. His voice was calm, almost bored. "I just want to eat," he said, "but I don't like watching people get swallowed." For a moment no one spoke. Snow fell. Nova stood like a carved sentinel chest, broad eyes burning gold. Hank took an involuntary step back. Officer Reed shifted his weight, discomfort finally visible on his face. "We'll revisit this," Hank muttered, already retreating toward the SUV. Ethan didn't watch them leave. He looked at Darlene instead. "I'll finish up," he said. She nodded, unable to speak yet. Nova stayed at Ethan's side, steady and unyielding, as Cedar Hollow learned that morning that silence, when backed by integrity, could be louder than threats. The afternoon darkened early, the way it does when winter decides to stop pretending. Wind rose from the western ridge in uneven pulses, lifting loose snow into the air until it hissed like sand. The sky bruised into violet and slate, and by the time the sun slipped behind the mountains, Granite Pass had already begun to erase itself. Ethan Mercer felt it before he saw it. The pressure drop sat heavy behind his eyes, the kind that made his damaged knee throb with an old familiar warning. He stood outside Maple and Steam Cafe, wiping his hands on his jacket after finishing the last loose board on the steps. Nova stood beside him, ears high, nose lifting toward the wind. The German shepherd's posture changed subtly. No panic, just alertness sharpened into focus. "Black ice," Ethan muttered, not guessing, remembering. Cedar Hollow was already filling with lights and laughter. The winter night market had drawn strings of bulbs across Main Street. Music spilling from portable speakers, tourists stamping their feet and clutching hot drinks. The town had chosen celebration over caution. Ethan watched the flag snap once hard, then fall slack. He smelled it then, the faint metallic cold that rode on the air before ice formed invisible and lethal across asphalt. He didn't hesitate. He reached down, clipped the rope leash to Nova's harness, and turned toward the road, climbing out of town. "Come on," he said. Nova did not resist. He surged forward, pulling slightly, as if he already knew where they were going. The road toward Granite Pass curved sharply, rising through trees that bent and creaked under the wind. Snow thickened with every step, flakes driven sideways, now stinging exposed skin. Ethan jogged when he could, ignoring the pain screaming through his left knee. His breath burned. His mind narrowed to essentials, footing wind direction, Nova's line of movement. They heard it before they saw it, the dull metallic groan followed by a sound like thunder trapped in a barrel. Ethan broke into a run, boots slipping, arms windmilling once before he caught himself. The bus lay tilted across the road, its rear end pressed against the snowbank, its front wheels hanging inches from the drop-off. It was a small school transport, painted yellow, beneath layers of ice and snow hazard lights, blinking weakly through the storm. Steam hissed from beneath the hood. Inside, silhouettes moved. High-pitched cries cut through the wind. "Stay," Ethan told Nova, though the dog was already straining forward, nose low, tail stiff. Ethan scrambled to the door, yanking it open with both hands. Cold air flooded the interior. Inside were children, 6 of them, ranging from about 7 to 12 years old. They were strapped into seats, eyes wide, faces pale with fear. At the wheel sat the driver, a woman in her late 30s, dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat despite the cold. Her name tag read Marissa Cole. She was average height, sturdy build, with a lined face that suggested long hours and responsibility she didn't get paid enough for. Blood trickled from a cut near her temple, but her eyes were clear. "I lost control," she gasped. Ice came out of nowhere. "I know," Ethan said calmly. "We're getting everyone out." He shrugged off his jacket and draped it around the smallest child, a girl whose teeth chattered violently. One at a time, he said, voice steady, carrying preventable panic away with it. "Listen to me, and you'll be fine." Nova moved without command. He planted himself beside the open door, bracing his body against the bus's frame, claws digging into packed snow for traction. His presence alone seemed to anchor the scene. The children noticed him, fear briefly replaced by wonder. Ethan looped the rope through the bus's handrail and around his waist, securing himself before stepping inside. He unbuckled each child, lifting them carefully and guiding them into Nova's waiting space. Nova leaned into each small body, warmth radiating through his thick coat, steady as a wall. "Good boy," Ethan murmured under his breath, more prayer than praise. The last child out was a boy of about 10 with freckles and a split lip. He clung to Ethan's arm. "Is it gonna fall?" "Not while we're here," Ethan said. He meant it. Marissa was last. She insisted on climbing out herself, refusing help until Ethan fixed her with a look that brooked no argument. He took her weight, easing her down as the bus shifted slightly, metal groaning in protest. Nova barked once, sharp warning. Ethan adjusted instantly, guiding them away from the edge. They had barely cleared the road when headlights cut through the snow. Hank Voss's SUV skidded to a stop, far too close for safety. Hank jumped out, phone already raised, coat flapping uselessly in the wind. His smile was gone, replaced by excitement sharp as hunger. "Unbelievable," Hank shouted over the storm, angling his camera. "Look at this. Drifter interfering with an accident scene." Ethan ignored him, checking the children for injuries, pulling spare hats and gloves from the bus. Nova stood guard, eyes locked on Hank, body taut. Hank's voice dropped, bitterness slipping out unguarded. "Just leave them. Town needs the resort more than it needs a few extra mouths." The words cut through the storm cleaner than any blade. One of the parents who had arrived late froze mid-step. Another woman covered her mouth. Even Marissa stared at Hank, disbelief flickering into anger. "What did you say?" she demanded. Hank realized too late that he had said it out loud. He scoffed, backing away. "I'm just saying priorities." Sirens wailed distantly. The first patrol car arrived moments later, sliding to a cautious stop. Officer Lucas Reed stepped out, eyes widening at the scene. He moved automatically, radio crackling, calling for additional units and medical support. His gaze flicked to Nova, then to the snow near the bus. Dog tracks, he said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Hank seized on it immediately. There you go. Vicious animal. Probably caused the whole thing. Nova growled low, a sound that vibrated through his chest. Like distant thunder, Ethan placed a hand on his neck, firm but calm. Nova stilled instantly. Those tracks aren't his, Ethan said. He crouched, despite the pain, brushing snow aside with bare fingers. Look. Officer Reed knelt reluctantly. Ethan pointed to the print's deep, sharp claw marks, extending well beyond the toe pads. These claws are long, hooked, untended. He lifted Nova's paw gently. His nails are trimmed, blunt. And see this? He indicated a faint scar on Nova's rear pad. Old injury. Would show in the print. These don't. Reed swallowed, nodding slowly. You're right, Hank sputtered. That doesn't prove it proves enough. Reed cut in voice, steadier now. The crowd murmured, phones lowered, eyes shifted toward Hank with something colder than snow in them. An ambulance arrived, lights flashing. Paramedics took over, ushering the children and Marissa into warmth. One of the kids waved at Nova as they were loaded inside. Nova's tail wagged, once restrained but proud. As the storm intensified, the truth settled heavier than the snow. Ethan stood quietly, hands jammed into his pockets. Nova pressed close against his leg. He had not raised his voice. He had not invoked any authority beyond evidence and calm. And it had been enough. Hank retreated toward his SUV, face-tight, phone forgotten. The damage was done. Words once spoken did not disappear so easily. Ethan turned away from the road as the pass vanished behind curtains of white. We should go, he said softly to Nova. This isn't done yet. Nova glanced back, once amber eyes reflecting flashing lights and falling snow, then followed Ethan down the road, leaving Granite Pass and its buried truths behind them for now. Night did not arrive so much as it collapsed. The first gust hit Cedar Hollow like a slammed door, rattling windows and snuffing out laughter mid-breath. Within minutes, the world dissolved into white noise, wind howling with a voice like a living thing, snow blasting sideways in stinging sheets that erased streets, buildings, and direction. Power lines groaned once, then surrendered. The town went dark. By instinct more than planning, people ran toward the only place that felt solid. Maple and Steam Cafe filled with bodies and fear. Boots stamped snow onto the floor. Someone slammed the door shut only to have it buck violently as the wind tried to pry it open again. Darlene Whitaker, her broad shoulders squared and her gray-streaked hair coming loose from its knot, moved with fierce efficiency. She barred the door, shoved tables against the windows Ethan had reinforced earlier, and snapped orders in a voice that carried authority, born of years keeping a small business alive when everything wanted it dead. The cafe lights flickered once and died. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by the dim orange glow of a camping lantern Darlene dragged out from beneath the counter and the low red eye of the wood stove Ethan had insisted on stacking full that afternoon. Children cried, adults shouted, someone prayed. Ethan Mercer stood near the stove, jacket collar turned up his face, carved into calm. Snow melted into his beard, refroze. His eyes tracked the room, counting people, measuring panic like a variable he knew how to control. His knee throbbed fiercely now, pressure building as the storm intensified, but he locked it behind discipline and breath. Quiet, he said, not loud, but firm enough to cut through the noise. Everyone to the center, less surface area. Share blankets. It was not a suggestion. It was the tone of a man who had once spoken under worse skies. People obeyed without quite knowing why. Nova hovered at Ethan's side, his large body tense but steady. The German shepherd's silver-streaked coat bristled as the wind screamed against the walls. He watched the room eyes amber and alert, reading fear the way he once read threats. When a sudden gust shook the windows hard enough to make the glass bow inward, several children screamed and dropped to the floor. Ethan looked down at Nova and gave a small nod. Nova moved. He crossed the room with deliberate calm and lowered himself beside the children, curling his massive body around them in a crescent of fur and heat. One child flinched at first, pulling away, but the cold decided faster than fear. Small hands gripped thick fur. Nova did not shift. He lay still, breathing slow and deep, radiating warmth like a living stove. His tail flicked once protective patient. A woman near the wall whispered, "Is that safe?" Ethan answered without looking back. Safer than panic. Minutes stretched into hours. The storm grew louder, a freight train circling endlessly. Snow piled against the windows. Frost crept along the doorframe like veins. The cafe became a bunker, crowded, breath-heavy, alive. Darlene rationed soup, ladling carefully from a pot thinned with water, but thickened by purpose. Officer Lucas Reed helped where he could, his procedural caution stripped away by necessity. Even strangers leaned into one another, learning the shape of survival together. Outside, Cedar Hollow disappeared. Near dawn, the wind finally began to tire. The howl softened into a long, aching moan. Snow fell straight down again, thick and quiet. In that fragile lull, a new sound cut through the stillness. The low, deliberate rumble of engines built for places roads did not want to go. Headlights appeared first, punching holes through the white. Then shapes emerged, a convoy of matte black 4x4s, crawling steadily up Main Street, tires, chained bodies lifted high. They moved with disciplined spacing, indifferent to the wreckage of the storm. People pressed toward the windows. Murmurs rippled. The lead vehicle stopped in front of the cafe. A man stepped out, tall and broad, moving with the contained confidence of someone used to rooms going quiet when he entered them. He was about 50, with steel-gray hair cut close at the sides and a short, immaculate beard framing a sharp jaw. His coat was dark, expensive, and practical, the kind worn by men who solved problems rather than explained them away. His eyes scanned the building, assessing, calculating. This was Caleb Rayner. He approached the door, waited until it opened, then stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. His gaze landed on Ethan immediately and stayed there. Recognition flickered, not surprise, but confirmation. Mercer, Caleb said clearly, voice carrying through the room. "Ethan Mercer, legal heir to the northern Cedar Hollow timberlands." Silence fell like a second snowfall. Darlene froze, mid-step, ladle in hand. Officer Reed stiffened. Someone gasped. Across the room, Hank Voss, who had pushed his way inside earlier, pale and furious, went utterly still. Ethan did not react outwardly. He simply exhaled slowly, the way one did when a long-avoided door finally opened itself. "Morning, Caleb," he said. Caleb inclined his head slightly. "I was hoping we'd find you alive." The room erupted. Questions, accusations, confusion. Darlene stared at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time and the last all at once. "What is he talking about?" she demanded. Ethan raised a hand. The gesture was small. It worked anyway. "I didn't want this to be a reveal," he said quietly, "but storms have a way of digging things up." Caleb spoke then, filling in what Ethan did not. He explained that Ethan had once held a controlling interest in the defunct North Ridge Timber Cooperative land that included most of the forest north of town. That Ethan had walked away years earlier, refusing to play along with accounting tricks, land seizures, and threats dressed up as contracts. That for months now, Ethan had been quietly investigating how Hank Voss and others had been leveraging debt intimidation and forged easements to consolidate land under the guise of development. Hank found his voice at last. "That's a lie," he snapped, but it rang hollow, even to himself. Caleb turned his cold gaze on Hank. "We have documentation," he said simply, "and witnesses." Hank looked around the room at the faces that had once tolerated him. He found none that would save him. Ethan stepped forward, then limping slightly now that the adrenaline was gone. Nova rose with him, standing tall at his side, his presence unmistakable. "I didn't come back to take anything," Ethan said. "I came back to make sure what happened to this town doesn't keep happening." He looked at Darlene. "Your cafe stays yours. Debt cleared. Same for anyone else who was pushed to the edge." Darlene's hands shook. She set the ladle down slowly. Why? Ethan glanced down at Nova, then back at the room. "Because someone once taught me that land doesn't mean anything if the people on it are crushed." Caleb nodded. "The assets will be placed into a community trust. Schools, medical access, infrastructure, decisions made locally." A sound rose then. Not applause, not cheering, something quieter, relief. Hank tried to retreat, but Officer Reed stepped into his path, spine straight at last. "You'll want to stay," Reed said. "There are questions to answer." As dawn finally broke pale blue, slicing through the cloud cover, snow lay 4 feet deep across Cedar Hollow. The storm had stripped the town bare and left it blinking in new light. Later, when the cafe emptied and the convoy prepared to leave, Caleb gestured toward the hill where the old Mercer house stood, vast, dark, untouched. "It's been secured," he said. "Restored. Ready." Ethan followed his gaze for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No." Caleb paused. "Sir, I'm staying where the fire is," Ethan said. He looked toward the forest, toward the small cabin hidden among pines. Nova's ears flicked as if he understood. "Turn the house into something useful." Caleb studied him, then smiled faintly. "As you wish." Ethan walked out into the clean morning air. Snow glittered like shattered glass under the rising sun. Nova pressed against his legs, solid and warm. Cedar Hollow watched them go, understanding at last that the man they had judged by his coat had been carrying the weight of the valley all along. Sometimes God does not arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes his miracles walk beside us on 4 tired legs, wrapped in fur and trust. In Cedar Hollow, the storm did not only bury roads and rooftops, it uncovered hearts. A man the world called nothing was carrying faith shaped by endurance. A dog the town feared became a living blanket of mercy. And in the coldest night, God reminded everyone that he often works through the overlooked, the broken, and the quiet. The miracle was not just that lives were saved from the storm. The miracle was that pride softened, fear learned to listen, and judgment stepped aside for compassion. In our daily lives, we may not face whiteout blizzards, but we face loneliness, exhaustion, debt, illness, and moments where the world turns its back. When that happens, remember this: God's grace does not always remove the storm. Sometimes he sends a companion to help us stand inside it. If this story touched your heart, may God bless you and keep you safe tonight. May he warm your home, calm your fears, and remind you that you are never truly alone, even when the road is covered in snow. Please share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from or who you're praying for. Subscribe to the channel so more stories of faith, kindness, and quiet miracles can reach hearts around the world. May God's peace go with you, and may the smallest acts of love become the greatest miracles in your life.